Good afternoon, class, and good afternoon once again to all our viewers. We thank you for coming again to our seminar series. Today we're going to be discussing poverty and inequality, a topic that needs no introduction in as unequal a country as South Africa is. The question or the motion that is before the class today is, should we be given the stage of development at which South Africa is at, should we be affording a priority, or should we be prioritizing economic inequality or reduction in economic inequality given our stage of development? For those who are for the motion, that yes, we should be emphasizing or putting an emphasis on economic inequality are Sina and Hazel, and those who are against the motion and arguing instead that what we should be focusing on is economic growth is Dante and Bethel. So thank you. Without much further introduction, I'll hand you over to the side that is for the motion. Thank you. You're for okay. No, sorry, no problem. We can get the other side to start with. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm just going to share some thoughts on the perspective that we need to grapple with economic growth, especially in South Africa, to obtain a desirable rate. And I just want to qualify that the National Development Plan has set the target that we need to grow at around 5%, and actually annually create around 450,000 jobs so that we can be able to have a dent on poverty and indirectly have a dent also on inequality. But our focus is that you need to drive economic growth rate so that you're able to have a robust way of dealing decisively from a policy instrument and policy formulation and making sure that the intended benefits of growth are actually filtering down to the broader society. Now, what is gross domestic product per capita? It is a measurement for total economic output of a country divided by number of people and adjusted for inflation. It is used to compare standard living between countries, but at the same time it's an indicator that consists of following three concepts: making sure that there's actually personal consumption, business investment, and government spending and exports. So now the real GDP removes the overhang on price elasticity or changes, making it accurate for measurement of actual output of a country. Now, and also to be able to measure year on year how a country is performing overall. Now, in 1998, this country came up with a report that looked at how South Africa is actually performing from an economic growth rate perspective. And it is quite clear that over a period of over 10-15 years, we've not had a desirable growth rate as a country. And the current revised estimates by the International Monetary Fund is that we'll be growing at 0.6%. Now, if I take that and compare it with our intended objectives from a Vision 2030 of South Africa from a National Development Plan, we are far, in fact, far below in terms of our drive to achieve the 5% growth rate, and also creating jobs to the tune of 450,000 on an annual basis. Now, I just want to stress also that it is important that we apply and deploy our resources and energies to root out poverty. And rooting out poverty should be our single-minded objective, and using economic growth as a measure or a means to be able to take lots of people out of poverty. And I do acknowledge that sometimes there could be unintended consequences when you drive, economic growth. But our motion is that you need to be single-minded, and you need to drive that very strongly. Poverty is an inability of individuals or households or communities to command adequate resources to satisfy also socially acceptable minimum standards of living. And South Africans perceive poverty as being alienated from community, experiencing food insecurity, and also living in crowded households, and also using unsafe and insufficient forms of energy, lack of jobs, and also being in a family structure that is disintegrated. And we've seen this over a period of the apartheid era and also in post-apartheid context. Now, since the 1960s, we've been growing at about 6%. And from the 1970s, we declined to 3%. And these are stats that come out of government research, like, for example, the Presidential Interministerial Committee on Poverty. Now, the question is, if we want to deal with poverty, we need to up our game to be able to leave the desired level of actually economic growth. And I might add that the Statistics South Africa, our statistical agency, issued a population estimate report for 2015 that says that we've been growing as a population from 2002 and 2003 at 1.28%. Now, the key thing is, if our population growth is actually going to peak at 1.65%, especially between 2014 and 2015, and our growth rate is at 0.6%, and we're not even optimally getting to 5%, we run the risk of a scenario where our population growth will peak and growth decline. And that would be a major crisis from an economic structure point of view. Just to conclude, it is important to acknowledge that countries like China have managed to deal with poverty decisively. And China, over a period of about 2.5 decades, they've been growing at 9.8%. And the high growth in China has essentially occurred because of much higher rate of investment in China by government, by business, by residents or citizens of China itself. The investment rate in China has fluctuated between 35 and 45% over the past 25 years. Now, at the same time, the diversification of the economy and the structure of the economy opened up that kind of capacity in the economy. And this growth, which is spectacular in comparison with other countries, has been at around 10%. And also we've seen the capital formation as a share of GDP has been very high at international standards, varying between 34% and 44% of GDP. Now, with recent data is that China has around 45% that is capital formation investment in its economy. And the point here is we need to have a single-minded view to drive economic growth rate, to be able to deal with poverty, and also have capital investment in the economy for extra capacity to deal with poverty.
Thank you. I would just like to apologize to the panelists. I introduced you incorrectly. The side that's for the motion of poor growth rate had come on first. So just to quantify that, this is the side that is economic growth should be prioritized over reduction in economic inequality. Sorry about that. Thanks. Please.
For the motion that we should prioritize inequality in order to have a better economic growth in South Africa, especially in the South African context. Inequality continues to grow between rich and poor, developed and developing countries within regions. South Africa has been reported to be one of the most unequal countries in the world. Although efforts have been made to reduce poverty, through grants and RDP housing, but the phenomenon continues to grow. The former President Thabo Mbeki commented on the state of the economy in South Africa by stating that the country has two economies, with the first economy being prosperous, skilled, largely white, while the second is poor, unskilled, and largely black. We therefore argue that poverty reduction would not solve the inequality. We also argue that economic growth does not solve poverty and inequality, as the distribution of wealth remains in the hands of those who are already wealthy and does not trickle down to the poor as suggested by the proponents of economic growth. Inequality in South Africa. According to the Human Rights Report of 2004, South Africa remains one of the most equal societies in the world with inequalities in income distribution and Gini coefficients, which continues to rise. Although the situation appears to be dire, there's a room to reduce poverty if only the government could address inequality through expenditure, finance, and through taxes. Evidence shows that social grants like old age pension and children's can help to reduce poverty to a certain extent. It's from the back of 2003, paragraph 10. This can lead to more and better quality social services, which constitute what is now known as social wage. Disparities in the distribution of wealth. It should also be noted that in South Africa, has changed from being race-based to class-based. This is evident through the emergence of the rich black elites. However, it is only a small proportion of black South Africans which is benefiting and has benefited from the post-apartheid economic dispensation. And former President observation Thabo Mbeki do not need introduction, as this type of situation is visible. My personal observation is that one can drive from 10 minutes from Umhlanga to Wamash to see unequal economic distribution. Hence, President Mbeki described the two types of economies in the country. A big piece of the pie is still in the hands of the few, majority being white and male. The economy is still not transformative enough and inclusive. The typical South African corporate is still the same. Like when white men in the boardroom, white women at the reception, and black men in the factory. Black women cleaning, cooking, or doing menial jobs. Thus, the biggest corporate success stories still remain in the hands of those who were already wealthy decades ago. South Africa has unreasonable level of wealth along disparate poverty in the midst. The two richest people in South Africa have the same wealth as the bottom half of the population. The current economic situation, although the beginning of the discussion looks bleak, we must remark that increasing the size of GDP is good and it is a sensible economic objective to pursue. However, we must emphasize that it is regressive and dangerous if the pie is not shared fairly or equally. And we also argue that the pursuit of economic growth without first addressing the inequality or how growth can be shared is responsible for many socio-economic ills being witnessed in today's world, and particularly in South Africa. South Africa is rich in natural resources and is a leading producer of platinum, gold, chromium, and iron. Yet its economic distribution does not match its wealth. According to SA statistics, from 2002 to 2008, South Africa grew at an average of 4.5% year on year. Its fastest expansion since the establishment of democracy in 1994. However, the ANC government, which is governed today, The country, since the advent of democracy, has failed to address the structural problems such as the widening gap between the rich and the poor, low-skilled labor force, high employment rate, deteriorating infrastructure, high level of corruption and crime rate. And then, in the case of labor, of trade unions, taken from the rise or fall of trade unions in South Africa. South African government has been promising to create jobs since 1994, but government cannot sustainably provide jobs, and this should not be its mandate. The implementation of the growth, employment, and redistribution they started in 1995 failed to bear fruits in the labor market until 2003, when labor absorption began to increase, but progress was then since the beginning of recession in 2008. Coming back to the manifestation of inequality. Inequality manifests itself in health and problems such as mental illness and violent crime, and also threatens social and political stability. When people rise up in anger over economic inequality, inequality also retarded the development of human beings, being social and physical capital necessary for raising living standards and improving well-being. In conclusion, inequality undermines growth and future growth, and also diminishes the poverty, reducing impact of growth. It leads to huge differences in life chances. The poorer have the odds stacked against them in terms of education and life expectancy. The poorest rural women are almost 6 times more likely than the richest urban men to never attend school. And I therefore argue that urgent action is needed to level the playing field by implementing policies that redistribute wealth and power right down to the poor. Schooling is also critical for reducing inequality in the long run. Human accumulation is one possible mechanism which can be used to overcome growth part where the rate return of capital exceeded the rate of human growth by Boret 2005. Boret further points out that in order to generate more equal growth part, schooling and education pipeline play a potential crucial role in improving long-run growth trajectory. Thank you.
Sorry, just before we get to the next speaker, I noticed that Ntando had a hand up from about 2 minutes back. So we're going to give a minute extra to this side. Don't mind Ntando. And I also want to use this here just to, for the viewers out there, just for some advertising. Our next seminar is on pass rates, grade 12 pass rates and performance of the education system. Just tapping on what Hazel had said. So please stay tuned for the next episode right here. Thank you. Bethel.
Good afternoon. I am Masiga, and I will be arguing affirmative with regard to approach. My colleague has already given you conflict statistics, so I will proceed immediately. Poverty over inequality resolved. The real tragedy of the poor is the poverty of their aspirations. Adam Smith, economic growth. This refers to a steady physical increase in a country's productive capacity, which is identifiable by a sustained increase in a country's real output of goods and services, or real national income over time. Definition. Now, in the words of Danny Roderick, Harvard University, in his paper, One Economist, Globalization, Institutional and Economic Growth, 2007, he states that, historically, nothing has worked better than economic growth in enabling societies to improve the life chances of their members, including those at the very bottom. The central lesson from the past 50 years of development research and policy is that economic growth is the most effective way to pull people out of poverty and deliver on their wider objectives for a better life. Now, research that compares the experiences of a wide range of developing countries finds consistently strong evidence that rapid and sustained growth is the single most important way to reduce poverty. Now, a typical estimate from this cross-country studies is that a 10% increase in a country's average income will reduce the poverty rate between 20 to 30%. Now, the central role of growth in driving the speed at which poverty declines is confirmed by research on individual countries and groups of countries. And for example, a flagship study of 14 countries in the 1990s found that over the course of the decade, poverty fell in the 11 countries that experienced significant growth and rose in the 3 countries with low or stagnant growth. On average, a 1% in per capita income reduced poverty by 1%. Now, among these 14 countries, as you do follow, the reduction in poverty was particularly spectacular in Vietnam, where poverty fell by 7.8% a year between 1993 and 2002, having the poverty rate from 58% to 29%. Other countries with impressive reductions, rather, over this period include El Salvador, Ghana, India, Tunisia, and Uganda, which each with declines in the poverty rate of between 3 and 6% a year. These are statistics according to the Department of International Development. You can look up that. Now, India has seen significant falls in poverty since the 1980s as well, rates that accelerated into the 1990s, and this has been strongly related to India's impressive growth record over this period. I will also include Mozambique, which illustrates the rapid reduction in poverty associated with growth over a short period. Between 1996 and 2002, the economy grew by 62%, and the proportion of people living in poverty declined from 69% to 54%. Now, affirmative growth is essential if governments are going to be able to continue to provide public services, which will directly benefit the poor. Now, although aid may provide initial support, increasing public expenditure in developing countries must ultimately be financed by collecting greater tax revenues. Botswana and Kenya provide contrasting examples of this micro. High growth of any sort in principle involves progressive taxation and targeted government spending on the poor. Now, we ask ourselves, which is the way to go? We have heard about the statistics. I will speak to approach as on the way to go with pro-poor growth policies. Now, in the spirit of this debate, pro-poor growth involves absolute growth of the incomes of the poor and in relative sense, disproportionately benefiting the poor. This is Stephen Classic, 2002. Recent policy, research documents, and organizations have identified pro-poor growth as the most important ingredient for achieving sustainable poverty reduction. Poverty reduction has become the central objective of development efforts as evidenced by the Millennium Declaration, the Poverty Reduction Strategy Paper process, and the associated lending instruments by the IMF and the World Bank. Thus, achieving pro-poor growth is most certainly today's development challenge. Fortunately, there are causal linkages that exist between income poverty and income measures of well-being. Now, in particular, if the poor have better health and education, this will improve their chances of escaping poverty. Higher income will typically allow the poor to obtain greater access to health and education services, and given that nothing is close to perfection, monitoring progress to ensure effective implementation is necessary. Now, economic growth can be pro-poor in 2 ways. The first is a pattern of growth that immediately raises incomes of the poor, as already pointed out, and this must be growth that favors those sectors and regions where the poor live, keeping in mind that the poor are not distributed evenly throughout an economy. Thus, sectoral, regional, and functional distribution of growth matter for poverty reduction. The second way is via public redistributive policies. transfers and other government spending, please refer to taxation statement I have made. Thomas et al. 2000 state that government spending on the poor could promote their inclusion in economic growth and thereby improve the linkage between poverty and reduction. Now, the majority of the poor live most often than not in rural areas. Most depend directly or indirectly on agriculture for their livelihoods. And the factor of production the poor possess and use most is labor and sometimes land. Thus, pro-poor growth focuses on improving incomes in the agriculture and make intensive use of labor. Thank you. All cases of successful development indicate that rapid growth and poverty reduction always involve an emphasis on improving productivity and incomes. This is Lipton 1995. Now, in the longer term, economic growth can be pro-poor through indirect linkages as well between sectors or regions, if you like, and factors of production. In example, I will, over time, high and intensive labor growth in manufacturing and services can lead to migration, response from poor rural areas, and increased income and employment opportunities for the poor. Now, pro-poor growth stimulates economic activity precisely in the pockets of poverty. You are aware what money will do once it is already in your pocket, of purchasing power. Strong government involvement is typically required as well, combined with incentives to encourage the private sector activities to also take part in growing the economy. Now, regarding the functional distribution of income, growth is pro-poor if it makes use of the factors of production. The poverty reduction records of countries such as India and the rapidly growing East Asian countries show that poverty reduction was largest. Yeah, it was largest when growth made use of the assets the poor possessed. Now, I will outline briefly the strong conditions for growth by name rather. So the first strong conditions for growth is that there must be physical capital, human capital, the rule of law, competitive markets, infrastructure, and increased agricultural productivity. Now my time is up. I believe you've been able to follow through suitably. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, please, if you get the speaker from the, excuse me, the last speaker from the side that is for the motion, that we should actually be concentrating on reducing poverty, economic inequality. My perception.
Inequality undermines growth and future growth, and it also diminishes the poverty-reducing impact of growth, while it leads to huge differences in life. It is inevitable that we still live with the symptoms of apartheid, and we still counting us, looking at the gap between inequalities that is always coupled with poverty in South Africa. Rates of inequality in the world are increasing, and we have to do something about it. Some countries took different avenues with regards to how regime or country can be run. Some chose social democratic, of which Scandinavian and other Northern European countries did. Some chose corporatist, of which Middle Europe and Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia did. And soon, neoliberal, of which Anglo-Saxon countries, Canada, Austria, Ireland, and others did. And so as South Africa, where poverty has persisted for decades. Bond 2014. It is impossible to single out inequality from poverty because they complement each other. One would ask, how then do we address poverty and inequality simultaneously? What really took us to where we are today? Policies. We have moved from RDP to growth, to GEAR, to GIFSA, up until National Development Plan. The same National Development Plan that is undermining education and qualification of the people of South Africa. Scholars such as Nicholas Vegon and Aurelia Segati agree that direct transfers, of which we interpret them as the PES in South Africa, social grants, can alleviate poverty. But then they do a little for inequality. Furtherly, he goes on to say, this is only act to entrench the same neoliberalism that South Africa chose if they are associated with it, encouraging private provision of services to the poor, that is outsourcing. This is absolutely correct. What difference will it make to a poor South African who has the stomach that is fed but cannot access other needs that are entitled to make her or his life complete? That is education and health. For an example, according to Accelerated School Infrastructure Development, ACID, which was launched in 2013, 500 mud schools in Eastern Cape should be replaced by 2016. Guess what happens? It's only less than 50 schools that have been built, and current year that we are in is 2016. And there is no way from now up to the last current accounting year that we're gonna make it to this 500. While on the other hand, a campaign of one child, one tablet by 2018 has been launched, leaving the Bwabe Primary School, of which this child is part of those 500 math schools, lamenting for at least ordinary decent concrete walls. The distribution of resources, particularly of the state, is not equal, which poses a threat to even higher inequality within the society. As for health, 7 years back, in 2007, National Health Insurance was launched via the ruling party. Up until today, it's been a pilot project in pockets instead of rolling it out nationally. On the other hand, there are stockouts that are persisting in rural areas, and yet there are also ordinary people who've been trying for 19 days in 2012 to start a business, of which it ended up until 2016, only 46 days is now needed just to start a business. So what does that tell you? Is it really the economic growth that we are concerned about? Will this economic growth that we are worried about be able to reach the same people who are unequal in South Africa? Or by the time we reach that 6% growth, nobody will be living in South Africa. Everybody will be dead. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to see that we're not dead here in the class. Maybe we're sleeping, like, you know, yeah. But we're going to wake us all up now. We're going to ask some questions. We went a bit over time. I'm sure I saw Ntanda waving frantically. We went a bit over time, so instead of having the usual 40 minutes of questions, we're going to have at least half an hour of questions, and then we're going to close up. Okay, so anybody who is not a corpse wants to ask the first question? I think I'm going to leave it to Tebo to ask the first question today, our fact checker. A lot of statistics were bandied about. I don't know if you got all of them. Okay, but if you have any questions, please.
Okay, most of the statistics were from even the 0.6, which is actually 0.7. We could ignore that. I just have a comment. And it would have been, I think, it would have been better to compare economic inequalities within the BRICS community, because that's where all this hoo-ha is happening, so that if we know how we are performing as a country in relation to the people that are on the same pedestal as us, it would have given a much better understanding. One question, the economic policy in South Africa is highly based on the socio-economic factors that were identified by the post-apartheid leaders. Well, what is both sides' view on the call for South Africa to drop the Mandela economic deals? Do you think that it goes more towards the growth, or it is more towards acknowledging the economic inequalities?
Interesting. Oh, thank you. Anybody else with a question? Ronald, I know you have a question at the back there, Ronald. Yeah? Anybody else with a question, please? I see those who are writing furiously.
Dante mentioned something about being single-minded. If you would like to elaborate on that, please. And by that statement, are you also saying there is only one solution in being single-minded, or are there no other options? Thank you.
Sorry, any other? Please,
this is for my colleague Dante. You mentioned long-term growth, which I support and understand that concept in terms of economic stability. But from your view, is it fair to allow people to live in such conditions in hope that in the future, in time, long-term, things will get better?
Sorry, Sandra, I'm just going to get the groups to answer. I think firstly I'd say the other group, well, they've got a lot more to deal with. So can I, Tebo's initial comment about the economic compromises in the settlement of 94. Yeah. What's your views on that?
What's the question again?
Well, my question was, there has been a call for South Africa based on how the economy is growing. There has been a call for South Africa to review what they call Mandela economic policy, which was more like socio-economic, right at the middle. They have to choose either they're going social, which is what you guys are going for, or they're pushing for economic growth. What is your take on that?
Okay. With regards to that, there is more of RDP, of which it was then, it could not finish its term. It focuses more on the people's inequality, simultaneously with the growth as well. For us, we think people are more important than just the growth, because they also contribute to the growth of the economy.
May I just expand on that, please, if you don't mind? I think what we're saying is there was a series of political compromises made. I don't know for members of our international audience as well as the class who are not South African. There were a series of compromises made around the structuring of the economy in the 1994 political settlement. I think what we're asking on, please if I speak under correction, please jump in and correct me. But I think what we're asking on is, what do you make of those compromises? Should they be undone? Should we revisit them perhaps? You know, after now 25 years, we haven't had the most spectacular growth. There are still unanswered questions surrounding issues of economic justice. And what does the settlement, these unaddressed questions, unresolved questions, should we perhaps be revisiting them now, after 25 years we've had of democracy? So, with that explanation in mind for our audience as well the class, is that more or less? Yeah. Okay. If you could get Dante, you've had a lot of questions, so yeah, if you could come in and please handle it.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Just on the first one on the Mandela deals or the Rainbow Nation deals that came after 1994, it was important and legitimate that we go through that kind of political settlement, and critically, if you look at the whole transition of South Africa from GIA to ASGISA to National Growth Path to National Development Plan, you see an attempt in the narrative from an economic transformation point of view to say, how do you deal with the structural inefficiencies of the economy, and the deficit in the economic transformation of this country is the mistrust among role players, your social actors, being business, government, labor, and civil society. Now, because all the elements that have been raised in those economic policy documents are issues that are debilitating our attempt to reach a desirable growth rate, like skills shortage, the joblessness, unemployment, I mean, stubborn growth and jobless rate that we have, the lack of capacity of our capital formation, that's private sector investment into the economy to expand the economy, and health issues, etc., infrastructure decay that we've seen over a period. Now, the foundation has been laid through the Mandela phase, you know, and the critical, for me, if I look at the critical path for capturing the rate that can actually take us out of these inefficiencies in the economic structure of South Africa is basically to have a collaborative effort to drive investment back into the economy.
So let me just get this straight, because I think it was on a really important, touching on a very important issue. Is everything is fine as it is. We just need to get together and start collaborating. Is that what? Okay. Now, please, anybody else want to take these single-mindedness comments?
Yeah, in terms of single-minded, I mean, if you look at policy is a choice. And if I look at example China is a typical example of how an economy or a state decided to deal with issues of poverty and take almost more than 500 million people out of poverty in a space of 30 years. And that's single-minded purpose, because you're creating capacity in rural areas, transforming rural areas to become more urban, more industrial. You're driving agricultural productive capacity. And in 2006, if I can quote, we had an engagement with one of the agricultural banks in China, where they've created 200 million farmers. And you look at that number, it's staggering. It's single-minded purpose to say, how do you deal with primary sectors of the economy, make it much more stronger, to to get people out of poverty, but also manufacturing capability with value addition. And for me, that's what I mean by single-minded purpose from a policy choice.
And I think we had one more statement on long-term growth. A comment or Sheena was,
I think there's something.
Sorry, repeat the question. Okay, I just said in terms of long-term growth, which I do support, but is it fair to allow people to live in these conditions in hope that in the future things are going to get better?
Yes, because you cannot handle everything all at once. Everything is systematic and it moves with progress. As is development, it is progression. So to be able to get them out of poverty, we must be able to move systematically. We must be able to anticipate, what might come in the future. And this can only be done by living in the moment, working with the moment. If you follow in my argument, am I answering you? Is that a question?
There's 25 years a moment.
20 years, 25 years is a long time.
It's a generation.
It's a generation, indeed. Those are decades.
Yeah.
But you cannot have instant gratification without moving through necessary steps. Everything needs to go step by step. That is my approach.
Just for this side, just bring the other side in. Is anything you'd want to add? And perhaps just a comment on 25 years in South Africa. We've had 25 years since the changes. The opening up of the initial dismantling of apartheid. If you could just expand on that. Would you wish to expand on that?
What's the question again?
No, it was just a comment really. Bethel had mentioned about the fairness of expecting people to be patient, and we'd asked about 25 years of patience. That's a pretty patient population.
Okay. We cannot trade off people's lives while we are still waiting for a miracle to happen, because already South Africa has have like 6 or 7 economic policies which failed, of which even the NDP itself is subject to fail. Because if we look at Act 23 of 2013, Tax Incentive Act, where economic zones were part of the apartheid era, they've been brought back. So now I'm saying it undermines education, because now the qualification, your education qualification won't be the priority, because there's only one income, one salary that is based, whereby the company would apply through the finance minister, who happens to, like, if he feels like he can grant that company the economic zone certificate. So now basically people who will be working there will only earn as from 2000, guided by what the policy is saying. So now we cannot also compare China with South Africa, because China on its own, it undermines the human rights, because it allows children to, there's a child labor as well that is there. They do not have unions, and most of their economy is being driven by the state, as compared to South Africa, who took the route of neoliberal policies, whereby most of the things are being privatized.
No, just to get sorry, you want to add on to it?
Yes. On the issue of time, though, you see, South Africa is still a young nation, still a young state. If you may not be able to compare it, but you should be able to contrast. And when you look at China, over 450 million people are already pulled out of poverty, and this started from 1979 up to time, and evidence shows that rapid economic growth took place between 1985 to 2001. So we're talking about periods of about 15 to 16 years. Everything takes time. Kenya itself, 50 years down after independence, they're still grappling with these issues. So everything has to move within a system. A system has to move within time.
So just in Tondo first, and then Ronald, and then back to Sondra. Please, Nsando, a question.
I think Dante has answered my question, but I'm just going to ask it again.
Yes, yes.
Hazel made mention of the two economies, yeah, and this economic inequality. How do we close that gap? Because even when we hear the president giving a speech on the State of the Nation address, he makes mention of jobs being created, but we see that people, even though those jobs are created, what type of jobs are being created? Because sometimes you get that it's temporary jobs, and just like a few weeks ago we had the strikes, the pick it up strikes, and people are unhappy about those jobs. So how do we close that gap, like in simple terms?
Thanks for that, Tony. Please, Ronald.
I have one question. I don't know if this is a valid question. The question is, how is economic growth in South Africa going to reduce inequality? As we know, achievement of great things comes from the ability to manage yourself very well. This South African economy is failing.
Sorry, I didn't get that. Did you guys hear that last part of the question? Please, sorry, please just repeat the question, please, Ronald.
Okay, I have only one question.
Yes, yes.
My question is, how is economic growth going to reduce economic inequality in South Africa? As we know, the achievement of great things comes from the ability to manage yourself very well, which South African economy is failing. So, how is inequality going to be addressed?
Please, Mr.
I just want to reiterate what was being said on this side about comparing South Africa and China, because they are not they're not on the same level, the same scale, in that they're following two different types of systems. But China more socialist, capital socialist, and South Africa is more, I guess, capitalist in that sense. And then I wanted to say about the reason China is not a developed country, is not categorized as a developed country, is because there's such a wide gap between the rich and the poor. They still have a great levels of inequality despite the economic growth. And they're not able to put a lid on this. So how is it that we're taking an example from China when they're not able to handle the inequality? And you're talking about China being able, Dante, earlier in your speech, about China handling poverty, or I don't know if it was poverty or inequality, and moving on. According to The Guardian, 82 million Chinese people live on less than $1 a day. And this was just early last year. These figures are still staggering, and yet we're looking at China as an example. Yeah.
Okay. Now, yeah, I think it's valid. You know, it's a valid argument that, yeah, should we be emulating the Chinese as we look up to? And I just want to get in here, please, anytime you feel like commenting on either of the questions that were raised, please do feel free to jump in, you know, your first preference. Sorry, yeah.
I just want to pick up on the narrative on China, especially when you look at your Western kind of media. You have to be very careful, and I'm a media practitioner. The thing about reporting is that there's an ideological narrative that comes through when you look at developing economies like China as an example, South Africa as another country. So, notwithstanding the fact that for a period of 30 years or so, one has acknowledged and seen how China as a country has managed to deal with issues of poverty. Obviously, on the other side of the equation is how you deal with inequality. And the critical factor here is that we need to do the basics right. You need to do things that are practical from a base perspective. And one of the primary areas where you can really drive an agenda of development is getting people working on the land and being productive. and from there you move into value addition in the agricultural production, including manufacturing, etc., etc. Now, there are lessons we can learn from China. I mean, I can cite the World Bank, which did a study in 2013 where they looked at how China currently is dealing with the issue of inequality after having dealt to some extent with some successes with issues of poverty. And there's an acknowledgement within the Communist Party to narrow the gap of the rich and the poor from an income inequality point of view. I'll be happy to deal with issues of income inequality, but not historical poverty. You see, so I think let's acknowledge the fact that there are some insights and some lessons that we can pick up from countries like China. India is another example that has done well to look at issues of poverty and also over time resolve the issue of inequality within its economic context.
Yeah, we've also had other questions here, and I think Ronald's question hasn't been addressed. Is, perhaps if I could, all this economic growth is going to take place, but what guarantee is that poor people are going to be able to take advantage of it? Can I say something like that, Ronald?
If I would refer to one of my statements, Ronald, where we were talking about creating open areas where you're creating manufacturing industries and you're urbanizing the rural areas. You see, when we're talking about urbanization, the poor are more likely to be able to migrate from rural areas to go to urban areas where they believe opportunities are central. So when we are growing areas, definitely we know that the poor will definitely be they will be gravitating towards areas where there are opportunities, and they will definitely benefit from that.
How does a poor person look for a job?
I think we need to appreciate the fact that poor people are intelligent, and one of the things that I just want to share here is that being poor doesn't mean you're materially weak or you don't have intellectual capability. And we've seen examples of how poor people have exploited and taken advantage of the infrastructure policy mechanism provided for them to become progressive in their lives, etc. I mean, a very typical example is if you look at Bangladesh as a case in point, you have a situation where a scenario or a financing instrument was provided for rural women, or women who may not have had an opportunity to start a business, but actually managed to start a business and became much more viable in providing for their families. My view and my perspective is that poor people have got creative capability when given an opportunity to exploit the resources provided by government and also other players, including the private sector and NGOs or social economic development agencies.
Sorry, Tanda, is that the question still remains? We'll still get an answer. I just want to get this other group to get you. It's been awfully quiet on this side. Like that. If y'all would want to get in and do anything, please, the opportunity is available. Yeah.
Okay. Bertolt spoke of people migrating from rural areas to urbanized areas whereby there are manufacturers, there are factories whereby they can get a job from there. I'm just worried about urbanizing the cities while the rural areas are being neglected Are we saying that the people should migrate to the cities just to get the job? Because now if we say that, then in that case that might be interpreted as the whole country should focus more on the people that are in the city, leaving those have not moved to the city like that. That's exactly our point, whereby we say the inequality of accessing, they cannot access all those services that are liable to them. Because now if we focus in the city, then that means they won't be able to get what they are entitled to. So would you say that migration would be the only way out in order to provide these people with jobs?
I would refer to how I stated that the poor are not concentrated in one particular area. They are spread out all over an economy. Now, the vast majority, we know that who live in rural areas, what we are advocating for is that we urbanize these rural areas. See, when we talk about gravitation, it does not necessarily mean migration. It just means you are getting towards where your opportunities are, and that does not necessarily mean it has to be in a city. You can be in a rural area that is developing, and opportunities can arise. When we are advocating for the development of the agricultural sector in the rural areas, they will get jobs. Skilled or unskilled opportunity presents itself, and that's like Dante said. The poor are not. They are intelligent, and they will be able to see these opportunities and be able to tap into them.
But then
we've just got. I'm just conscious of time. We've just got time for one more round of questions before we have closing arguments. In this last round, I'd like to ask our fact checker, anything that you'd want to pick up on? Yeah.
The poverty line, according to Oxfam, it sits at 53.8% previous year. So, in this 53, at least 49% of it is the youth. If you're commenting on company registration, don't you think that people are trying to build their own economy their own way by taking that initiative into their own hands and trying? Because with economic growth, you have to have some kind of company that you want to, as long as you can identify. So don't you, and also with poverty, we seem to be looking at poverty with just income. We are also looking at housing and water quality. And all these are funded by the returns from the economic growth that they are advocating for. So how do you weigh out the options in that situation?
And we'll leave it for the side that is, for the motion that is, we should prioritize inequality at the moment as well. Any other questions? Our last round. Please, Ntando. Yeah.
Maybe I missed it, I'm not sure, but I haven't heard anything from this group regarding the unequal distribution of resources and the nationalization of resources. Like, what is your view? What do you have to say on that?
Okay. And then a last question. Oh yes, please, someone, if you don't mind, somebody who hasn't had a chance today.
All right, I just have to answer this. Basically, Bethel said something like we shouldn't open funds basically from outside, that we should look at ourselves, or we should tax ourselves, say something like that about taxation. And we are looking for ways in which we can reduce poverty, basically. So I'm just trying to view this contrast, basically. You are saying we should not go and ask for funds or borrow money, and you want us, and the people are poor. South Africa, basically most of the people are poor. So what I'm saying, you want the government to continually keep on taxing, which I would like you to explain. And also, as she said, I did not get anything about inequality and your views about it.
Okay. Thanks. We'll start on this side, please. That was initially the initial comments.
Oh yeah, entrepreneurship, as you said, taking the initiative. Okay, my argument is that on the same line as you say, because now our concern is that in 2012, ordinary person like me, it would take 19 days to start a business, of which that's the other way of trying to make ends meet. But looking at 2015, it has become 46 days, of which now there's this barrier that is preventing a person, an ordinary person, to reach wherever would like something like that person can sustain himself or herself with. So basically the poverty, as they've mentioned, it's been seen as if
That's no problem. And we have two questions directed specifically to this side. Right. The nationalization. Okay. At the end, the nationalization of state assets. Right. And then, what would you all do about inequality?
Just on the nationalization of state assets, when you look at state assets, and this state assets can have a variety of classification. You have government in terms of providing of services. You have government owning corporations that are driving a development agenda, purely from an economic perspective. And you have also government owning assets in as far as land is concerned from mining productive capability perspective. Now, the key thing is that there's a role for government to drive an agenda of economic development with the view of getting poverty levels down and subsequently focusing on the inequality issues. But my view and my perspective, my colleague will expand also later, is that, and I'll repeat China as an example. You have a capacity of the state where it has control of those assets to have driven an agenda to get people out of poverty. And with a clear plan, and if you know the history of China from a communist perspective, is that every 5 years they have a plan that they implement meticulously to actually drive the objectives that they want to see over a period of a 5 year, using state machinery and state assets that are used to drive an agenda to get economic growth rate right, to drive poverty levels down. So I do not foresee an approach like that to have in a direct way to have made resources or to make resources unequal from a distributive point of view. I mean, if I look also in the context of South Africa, you look at South Africa coming out of apartheid, and you look at local government as an example, to have seen how the consolidation of municipalities to have become, especially metro municipalities, where development is one of the key drivers to drive one growth in local cities, two opportunities for people to access one services, and also access economic opportunities. If I look at that context, I think you would not necessarily have an equal distribution of resources, but from a historical point of view, because of the legacy of the kind of economy we've had, unequal distribution is not because of the current agenda of the current government.
It just struck me, I might have summarized it wrong, the point. Was it, does it capture the arguments that were given? Does it adequately answer what it is you're saying, Ntando? I might have actually just summarized it wrong.
Not adequately.
Not adequately. Okay. Where would you like it expanded on? I think maybe just to give it to the readers a bit of, not to the listeners, a bit of context. As politically, it's a hot potato at the moment. Looking at whether nationalization should be a route to go. We have our China cheerleaders here with us, who are advocating very strongly for state-led growth, state-led infrastructure. So I think it's a very politically hot button issue. And for the listeners who might not be aware of this, we have local government elections coming up. So it's on it's in the manifestos of many political parties. It's a hot button issue. Perhaps we should put that as another seminar at some time. So thanks for that, Ntando. Thanks. Yeah, please go ahead.
I think you're kind of missing the mark here, going around in circles, in that you're not addressing the distribution of wealth. You're talking about policies and how we can put them through and driving the economy, but the biggest issue here is not necessarily the economy, because it has improved as time has shown us, but distribution of wealth has become worse. So what then are you saying that the economy over wealth distribution is the...
I think that's the Prince's comments, and that Bethel was going to be answering that now.
In response to that, we are trying as well to reduce dependency, Prince. But alongside that, you see, we are not taxing the poor. We are only increasing taxes to those who already have more than, if I might say, more than they do have. So by increasing taxation on the rich people, those who already have a lot of money, how are you affecting the poor? You're not in any way. You're only increasing government taxation, and you're only increasing taxation, and this ultimately will lead to collecting of revenue. And when you distribute it, then why did the poor also get a chunk of the resources that are available?
So, and then we're just going to close up now, as we're running a bit over time. So could we have the side that's for the motion of yes, we should afford priority to reduction of economic inequality, to provide closing arguments for us, please. And it's, sorry, Ntando, it's just 3 to 5 minutes in this round. Okay, well, perhaps you should get, if you only have those closing arguments prepared, please. Bethel, if you could. Yeah.
Economic growth, we all know by now, contributes to a higher standard of living. This, of course, implies a greater quantity of better quality, of goods and services that are made available to each person. Now, it means that there will be greater access to commodities through economic growth, food, such as food, clothing, and housing, that will enable the poor to be able to not only satisfy the basic needs, but in the long term, it will be able to reduce poverty. Now, finally, a common reaction in the media, political debate, and of course within academic institutions as such, is to regard increasing inequality as a problem that demands new and redistributive policies. We disagree. We believe that inequalities as such are not the main problem. What policy should address instead is poverty, as we have advocated. Now, I invite you to our line of thinking that in the language of literature, we are faced with two evils, maybe none bigger than the other. But as we bite only what our mouths can chew, a time will come when both are dealt with, and sadly that day is not today.
Thank you. Turning argument from the competing side, please. Just to close, just to summarize the position and leave us before we vote.
The stats that are increasing that my brothers were elaborating on, do they really address inequality simultaneously with poverty? Because these two are intertwined. The poor will be improved if they get better education and health. That's one of the statements that you've made. Indeed, there will be. But then, would you say accessing all these services would enable these poor people to improve their lives? And as well as policies, are the policies really there to entertain those who already have, or they are there to direct each and every individual that's within the country to be able to access basic services such as health and education, as you mentioned? So I'll leave it up to you. If then if you speak of those indirect linkages whereby those neoliberal policies are really the ones that you're talking about as indirect linkages. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Now this is the part of the seminar where we're actually going to put this to a vote. Simpiwe, if you can actually, we're going to lose our audience here. But please, give us your comments, give us your likes, and any other topics that you would like to see debated. We appeal especially to the Mozambicans. I noticed came out the Chinese people. Please, China, you're our growth model here at COPS. So please, the Chinese people, yeah, send in your comments. Thank you.